millions of roads. Some are paved superhighways. Many are dirt tracks. Some lead to great cities. Others crawl through dark jungles. There are roads that wind through mountains in the clouds, and roads that cross arid desert basins. But the thing to remember is this: if you follow any road far enough, persistently enough, you will eventually find yourself on the one road that goes around the world. Our story starts here, Dearborn, Michigan. The address, number 1, the American Road. These men are professional drivers, 2 of the best in the business. The tall fellow on the right is Danny Ames. His partner is Phil Remington. Their assignment, to drive this car around the world, to head east and continue east on the one road that would eventually return them to their starting point. The road to New York was a turnpike. The road to England was a sea lane. Ahead of them, 3 months of driving through 16 different countries and over 15,000 miles of road. The road led first to London, an immense sprawling city the size of New York, and with the same kind of traffic problems. Trafalgar Square is as busy and bustling as Times Square. But there, the similarity ends, because in London, centuries of tradition rest like an invisible cloak on landmarks that are world famous, like the buildings of Parliament directly ahead, most easily identified by Big Ben, named for Sir Benjamin Hall. The Tower of London, built by William the Conqueror over 800 years ago. And Buckingham Palace, official residence of the royal family. Constructed in 1703, it's a rather new building by English standards. From Buckingham Palace, the road around the world led directly into a British cargo plane for the short hop across the English Channel to the continent of Europe. And Europe's brightest jewel, Paris. Some people say Paris is the most beautiful city in the world. Certainly no other city has so wide a variety of architectural treasures, like the great Cathedral of Notre Dame, the Sacré-Cœur, which overlooks the city from atop the Montmartre, and the imposing Arc de Triomphe, final resting place for France's unknown soldier. Paris is a city where a visitor could spend weeks, unless he were traveling a road around the world. And for Danny and Phil, the road now headed south and east to the country that is the geographical center of Europe, the proud little Republic of Switzerland. "200 years before the birth of Christ, during the Second Punic War, Hannibal's armies crossed the Alps by elephants and swept into the Po Valley to storm the gates of Rome. The Romans later built fine roads through the Alps to make possible the conquest of Switzerland. It was on these ancient Roman roads, widened and modernized by the industrious Swiss, that Danny and Phil wound their way through Switzerland toward the old Roman border. Beyond the Swiss-Italian border, Danny and Phil discovered little storybook coastal fishing towns like Portofino on the Ligurian Sea. They drove through Pisa, whose famous Leaning Tower has been a tourist attraction since the 1300s. And finally, to the capital of the most powerful of the ancient empires, Imperial Rome. The great Roman Colosseum, which held 80,000 spectators in the days of the Caesars, was originally covered with fine white marble. Over the years, the marble facing was removed, slab by slab, to decorate palaces and churches. One can't pass through Rome without stopping here, St. Peter's, the largest church of the entire Christian world. Or here, the romantic Spanish steps, which lead to the Piazza di Spagna. North of Rome, the road led to Venice, one of the most remarkable cities in the world. The road became a network of canals, and the only means of transportation, a gondola. For an afternoon, Danny and Phil relaxed, passengers for a change. They glided along the Grand Canal and under the historic Bridge of Sighs, so-called because 1,000 years ago, prisoners were led across this bridge from the palace to the dungeons. Later, they wandered in the shadow of the Basilica at the Piazza San Marco, two tourists among hundreds of others from all over the world. But for Danny and Phil, the time for sightseeing was over. A road was waiting. A road that would take them to a country less well known, Yugoslavia. The word means land of the South Slavs. Until now, Danny and Phil had thought of Slavic countries as being cold and dark. But Yugoslavia proved to be mild and sunny, with scenic beauties that could be sampled just by stopping, asking, and walking a few steps. These are the spectacular Plitvice Falls. In southern Yugoslavia is the city of Dubrovnik, founded in the 7th century by Greek refugees. For 1,000 years, it was an independent republic that stood off, or bought off, the Turks, Romans, Venetians, and Slavs. Today, Dubrovnik is a popular seaside resort where two men in a blue and white car from Dearborn paused to ask directions, then continued on their way on the one road around the world. Southward, that road led to the historic fountainhead of Western civilization, Greece. Dominating the city of Athens, like a crown atop the rocky hill of the Acropolis, is the fabulous Parthenon. These ruins survive as a magnificent monument to the golden age of Greece, the glorious 3 centuries that began over 2,500 years ago, which created the foundations for the arts and the sciences, the architecture and the theater we know and live with today. In Turkey, the road arrived at the gateway to Asia, Istanbul, once known as Constantinople, and before that, Byzantium. It's the only city in the world astride 2 continents. On this bank of the Bosporus is Europe. On the other side, Asia. For the short trip between the 2 continents, the road now led to a ferry. Most of Turkey is in Asia. Anatolia, or Asiatic Turkey, is one of the oldest inhabited regions in the world. People were growing wheat and grazing sheep and rearing children here centuries before the invention of the wheel. Now the road seemed to move backward in time as it led eastward through space and into the valley of Gurme. Gurme is one of the most time-haunted places on Earth, a forgotten region where the clock of history stopped 2,000 years ago. Only days before, Danny and Phil had passed through the modern cities of Istanbul and Ankara. Now they saw families threshing and winnowing their wheat the same way it was done in biblical times. The farmers of Gurme store their wheat in rooms which were carved out of these natural stone pillars by the early Byzantine Christians who found refuge in this valley. The walls of the chapels built during that period still are covered with reminders of the faith which survived the catacombs of Gurme. And for Danny and Phil, Gurme was one more example of the kind of friendly hospitality they were receiving at every stop. Hospitality that knows no nationality. Three days later, they sighted Mount Ararat. According to the Old Testament, it was on this peak that Noah's Ark finally came to rest. That night, they pitched camp near its base. They had come to the end of Noah's journey. but only the halfway point of their own. In Iran, which borders Turkey on the east, a camel is primarily a means of transportation. When Danny and Phil sighted their first caravan plodding its way across the Persian desert, they did what any Westerner would do. They stopped to take a look. Soon, a camel train would seem as commonplace to Danny and Phil as a freight train is to us. They were really in Asia now, and everything they saw and felt let them know it. The air was dry and hot, the distances vast. Ahead of them lay Tehran, seat of the ancient Persian Empire. Here, and later in the holy city of Isfahan, they visited the sacred mosques, the temples of the Muslim faith. Few Westerners realize that the intricate geometric shapes that dominate the decoration of Muslim mosques take this form because the Quran, in its injunction against idol worship, forbids the drawing or sculpting of living things. A few miles outside Tehran, the road led past a stream where priceless Persian rugs from the most prominent homes and palaces in Tehran are washed in its mineral water and then carried up the steep bank to dry in the hot Iranian sun. The road that links Iran and Afghanistan parallels the old caravan routes over which Marco Polo in the 13th century carried the silks and the spices, the rugs and the rubies of the East to Venice, and thence to the rest of the Western world. It pushes on through sand and heat and desert toward the mountains of the Hindu Kush at the rim of the world. And with each mile grows drier, dustier, rockier, crueler. At times they ran out of road altogether and were forced to navigate by compass and intuition. And even then they weren't sure of their direction. The camel, which they had laughed at 2 weeks ago, was having the last laugh. The return of the road signaled a return to civilization and water, the most precious commodity of all in this part of the world. And in dry countries where there is water, there is a village. Where friendliness is a way of life, no man is a stranger. Danny and Phil were greeted like returning heroes instead of visitors from a faraway place called Michigan. They're a proud people, the Afghani, proud to work and live in the tradition of their ancestors, and trained almost from birth in the skills of their fathers. The marketplace of Mazar-e-Sharif was a happy oasis of color and warmth. Today, as it has been for centuries, a welcome change for travelers following the stark and ancient caravan route across the desert. But travel along this route has not always been peaceful. The road now led to Bamiyan, today a quiet little town, but with its own tragic page in the history of man's inhumanity to man. For it was here that the soldiers of Genghis Khan defaced this giant stone Buddha after killing every man, woman, and child in the once great city. It is a tale still told by the village storyteller. The Mongol conquerors themselves renamed Bamiyan Mubali, the city of sorrows. For centuries, the road between Afghanistan and Pakistan has served as the principal trade route between Central Asia and the vast subcontinent of India. Linking the two countries is the Khyber, one of the most important mountain passes in the world. Through this pass have marched the armies of Alexander the Great and the soldiers of invading Persians, Tartars, Mongols, and Afghans. To this day, the Khyber is never left unguarded. Detailed to give the alarm in the event of an invasion and to assist travelers are the Hussildars, members of a civil defense corps. And the cracked Khyber rifles, immortalized by Rudyard Kipling, still trained by performing the ancient Katek war dances. Once through the pass, the road continued on across Pakistan toward that point on the Indus River where Alexander the Great was finally stopped. His eastward march to conquer what was then all of the civilized world was brought to a halt on this riverbank nearly 2,300 years ago. The Attock Bridge enabled Danny and Phil to do what Alexander the Great failed to accomplish, cross the Indus River alive. 5 hours later, they entered the city of Lahore, the capital and cultural center of West Pakistan. Few places in the world can match the sparkling fairyland beauty of Lahore's Shalimar Gardens. Shalimar was created some 300 years ago by the same man who built the Taj Mahal, the Mughal ruler Shah Jahan. These girls, incidentally, are not professional dancers. They are the daughters of prominent local families dedicated to keeping alive Pakistani traditions, like these classic dances. And when the dance is over, it's school's out, which prompts the same reaction in any language. India, colorful, majestic, strange, a land of endless fascination for the Western visitor. In New Delhi, capital of India, Danny and Phil arrived just in time to watch a review of the President's personal honor guard. The occasion was the commemoration of Mahatma Gandhi's birthday. Prime Minister Nehru, who led the observance, is one of the leading symbols of the new India. South of New Delhi was an impressive symbol of the old and vanishing India. This is one of the palaces of the fabled Maharaja of Jaipur. The Maharaja's hunting elephants were outfitted as they would be for a traditional tiger shoot. It was all part of the reception organized by the young Prince of Renwal for the prearranged visit of Danny and Phil. What followed was a typical example of how times have changed, even in Jaipur. The prince turned out to be as interested in this new American car as any Western sportsman, and suggested changing places with Danny for an hour. Danny was too polite, even to hint that the prince's hospitality was too much to handle. The next step in fabulous India was Benares, on the Ganges, holy city of the Hindus, city of the gold and red temples. Over 1 million religious pilgrims come each year to Benares from all over India to bathe in the sacred waters of the Ganges. Before their road took them out of India, Danny and Phil saw a new Indian use of a river, one that breaks with tradition and points to the future. At Konar, they visited the big new hydroelectric dam erected to furnish the area with power and irrigation and to control floods. It's one of many similar projects completed or planned for the new forward-looking India of today. India's free neighbor, the young Republic of Burma, is a happy melding of the great civilizations of India and China. At the monumental Shwedagon Pavilion in Rangoon, Danny and Phil had a chance to see how deeply the gentle Buddhist religion affects the people. Buddhism preaches that all the world's sorrows are caused by selfishness, and that brotherly love is the answer to the problems of life. The road now crossed over in Malaya, where it cut through hundreds of miles of rubber plantations. Raw rubber is tapped from the trees in much the same way New Englanders tap sugar from Vermont maples. Malaya's island city of Penang is the Chinese temple and monastery of Ayar Itam, the only one of its kind outside of China and Tibet. The statues represent the 4 winds, crushing under their feet the vices of the world and the evils which stand in the way of brotherly love. In the temple courtyard is the unique Well of the Snapping Turtles. Tradition has it that a long life awaits those who feed the turtles. The end of the long road through Asia was coming closer and changing with every mile. It crossed the Malayan border into Thailand, long known to the world as Siam, and entered the capital city of Bangkok. From Thailand, the road swung east again into Cambodia and became literally one road, the only road, as it plunged into the Asian jungle. Every struggle has its reward, and this was no exception. Just as they were beginning to wonder if their road through the jungle had an end, they came out to face one of the most awe-inspiring sights of the entire trip, the fabled ruins of Angkor Wat, built by the vanished civilization of the Khmer Empire more than a millennium ago. The Khmers were destroyed in battle, and for nearly 500 years, Angkor Wat was lost, even to legend. Not until the 19th century were the buildings seen again by the eyes of man. Today, the Jungle Temple is a national monument, and the Royal Ballet of Cambodia performs traditional dances against the background of its ruins on all religious and national holidays. Saigon, Vietnam capital city on the South China Sea was the last stop in Asia. For Danny and Phil, this was the end of the unknown part of the road. From Saigon east, there was only a boat crossing, then 4 days of driving on familiar American turnpikes from San Francisco to Dearborn. Behind them were all of the exciting and wonderful things they'd seen. The landmarks of 16 countries and hundreds of cities. The symbols of the great civilizations of history. The monuments to man's genius and ideals. They'd seen the milestones of the past and the promises for the future. And behind them were the people they'd seen along the way. Thousands of people, all kinds of people. Friendly, hardworking, and peace-loving. From them, Danny and Phil had learned that regardless of what they wear, how they earn their daily bread, or where they worship, people are more alike than different. On the one road that leads around the world. A road that you too someday may travel.